salvage colleagues is our collective dignity, and the day will come. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин
Mr. President, I would like to thank the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, and the Executive Director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell. We thank them for their briefings, which showed us the true scale of the tragedy of Palestinian civilians continuing in Gaza. Day in, day out, we are seeing the humanitarian situation there, which is plumbing new and new depths. The people in the Strip are living under the conditions of full-scale humanitarian disaster, and they are facing unfathomable hardship and hunger, which kills the adults and children. At the same time, despite the efforts by the humanitarian agencies and basically unanimous support from the Security Council, the humanitarian assistance, which is something that essentially all people in the Strip depend, is arriving in highly restricted amounts, and which are clearly not commensurate with the scale of the disaster. The situation is worsening quickly while there's a critical shortage of fuel, which is needed for the functioning of the basic infrastructure. Without fuel, what could happen is a complete paralysis of the hospitals, water supply systems, and food distribution centers, and that threatens the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians. We are particularly worried by the news that there is a possible stoppage of the water desalination facilities. It's unacceptable to have the people in Gaza, children first and foremost, that they are left without access to drinking water. The collapse of the water supply system can also lead to the outbreak of infectious diseases, which would further compound the humanitarian situation. Mr. President, the continued ground operations by the IDF and the artillery shelling throughout the territory of the Gaza Strip create truly impossible conditions, impossible for the survival of civilians. We firmly condemn these attacks, as a result of which civilians are killed and wounded. We are particularly worried by the consistent and clear pattern of strikes against those areas where people congregate looking for food, including near food distribution centers. According to the data from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, no fewer than 798 Palestinians died in the enclave as they were trying to obtain humanitarian assistance, and this is since the end of May this year. We're particularly concerned by a huge number of victims near those centers which are under the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and this is a mechanism, as many of us had warned in this chamber, instead of solving humanitarian tasks, has become a symbol of humiliation of human dignity and is life-threatening for those who need such assistance. Hundreds of people who died when they were trying to obtain assistance is a grim testimony of this fact. The work of this mechanism is dangerous for the beneficiaries and is morally unacceptable. We are convinced the UN Secretariat took the only right and responsible decision when they decided not to participate in this punishment, essentially, scheme under the guise of humanitarian operation. Let me recall here that very recently more than 200 NGOs launched a joint appeal to stop the work of this violent militarized mechanism, where Palestinians are faced with an impossible choice to decide whether they will die of hunger or while they're queuing up for their food ration. Unfortunately, despite all of this, Israel and the United States continue considering this mechanism effective, and they're bragging about the millions of numbers of meals that are supposedly have been passed on to the civilians and not Hamas. These statements are dubious at least and are not supported by the real situation in the Strip. One thing is clear here. If Israel assisted and not obstructed the humanitarian assistance supplies through the UN, then we would have at least a faint glimmer of hope that the humanitarian crisis would ease. Well, today we do not have such hope, and the massive collective punishment against Palestinians in violation of the basic rules of the IHL is something that's going on in front of our eyes. Mr. President, we are shaken by the recent strikes against the people in Deir el-Balah who were trying to obtain humanitarian assistance from UNICEF. As a result of this attack, tens of people were wounded and killed, and this includes 9 Palestinian children. On the 13th of July, in the Nusayrat camp, according to UN data, 7 more children were killed as they were queuing up for water near a humanitarian distribution center. These tragedies have become a frightful everyday occurrence, and we firmly condemn the killing of innocent civilians who were only trying to obtain the assistance that they vitally need. Such attacks undermine the very possibility of saving human lives and are a gross violation of international humanitarian law. Unfortunately, humanitarian personnel are also continue dying. There was another strike against the office of a humanitarian organization delivered on the 10th of July in Gaza, took the lives of 3 more humanitarians. This tragic incident once again shows how high the risk is that humanitarians are facing when they are doing their duty under the conditions of constant present danger. In parallel to attacks against humanitarians and the reporters who are covering Gaza, there is a true persecution unfolding against UN bodies which are out of favor, and this refers to UNRWA first and foremost, and this is the agency which for decades have been helping Palestinians with humanitarian assistance, education, and healthcare. UNRWA's uninterrupted and stable work is a guarantee of survival for the millions of Palestinians who are living not just in Gaza, but, as we all know, also in neighboring countries, the countries which took in refugees. Would like to underscore here that there has never been an alternative to UNRWA. And after UNRWA and the UN Secretary General, they went after the special procedures under the Human Rights Council. Such acts are not in line with the duties of a UN member states. They are in violation of the Charter and in violation of the Convention on Immunities and Privileges. This situation requires a very decisive international reaction. The protection and providing for the civilians in the occupied Palestinian territories is a duty of Israel as an occupying power. And this is not something that depends on whether or not it's acceptable for the Israeli leadership. We insist on unconditionally ensuring the safety of civilians. Unfortunately, all attempts by the international community to obtain the very basic principles of humanity being abided by are encountering an all-around support by Washington to its ally. The Washington essentially gave to West Jerusalem a carte blanche on any activity against Palestinians. Mr. President, if anyone is thinking that the situation in Gaza could not possibly get worse, well, they're probably wrong. According to the information we are getting, including from Israeli officials, West Jerusalem is preparing a new plan to move 600,000 Palestinians in the so-called humanitarian city in Rafah, south of the Morag military corridor. And the goal here to, in future, concentrate all 2 million Palestinians there, having checked them against their links with Hamas. The Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, has already characterized this plan as, in essence, trying to create a huge concentration camp, the Palestinian inhabitants of which will be deprived of any prospects for their future. We would like to point out here that the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Olmert, also shares such an assessment, and he called this initiative a part of a general campaign conducted by the Netanyahu government to conduct an ethnic cleansing and deportation of Palestinians. It would be interesting to hear an assessment of this initiative from OCHA and UNICEF. Mr. President, unfortunately, Gaza is not the only area where the Palestinians are situations so dire. We're very worried by the situation in the West Bank. There we're seeing intensified operations by the Israeli forces, especially in the north. What is being done by West Jerusalem leads to massive destruction, worsens humanitarian crisis, and deprives the displaced families of any hope for a return. We regularly receive information about the killings and violence against the Palestinian, the seizure of territory, and the demolition of their buildings. And this is unacceptable. We call on Israel to immediately stop the violence in the occupied Palestinian territory to ensure that the people are protected and the humanitarian assistance to civilians is not impeded. They need this now more than ever. It's important also to stop the expansion of settlements, stop the provocations on behalf of the settlers who are publicly humiliating the honor and dignity of the Palestinians. Mr. President, we all in this chamber have said many times that ensuring unimpeded humanitarian access to all of the needy in the Strip under the conditions of a continued military operation by the ADF is essentially mission impossible. Furthermore, it's clear for everyone that using force so as to save the hostages in Gaza is something that has shown to be ineffective. And in this regard, we would like to call on the parties yet once again to reach an agreement on ceasefire with the help of the mediation, such agreements which would result in the release and the exchange of all forcibly detained people. In order for the authorities in Israel to finally lift the blockade of this sector, the Washington has to reject their unconditional support for West Jerusalem, stop covering their violations of IHL, and use their influence to stabilize the situation. We're convinced that there is no alternative to this here. This is the only way that the vicious circle of violence can be broken, and the relaunching of the peace process of the Middle East settlement on the two-state solution can be obtained. The ultimate goal here is to create an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders with the capital in East Jerusalem, coexisting with Israel in peace and security. The many years of the Israeli-Arab conflict has shown that there is no other alternative peaceful scenario in the Middle East. In this context, we welcome the intent on the part of Saudi Arabia and France to convene an international high-level conference to support the two-state solution at the end of the month in New York, and we plan to participate in it very actively. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank USG Tom Fletcher and Executive Director Catherine Russell of UNICEF for their sobering briefings. Mr. President, humanitarian assistance should not be used as a political tool. And aid seekers must not risk their lives to get life-saving assistance. Unfortunately, what we witness every day in Gaza for several months contradicts our fundamental belief. We are deeply concerned by the recent announcement